don't chase around the margins for certain activities when you've got a big lever you could be pulling. And that lever essentially is taking a look at your form and seeing if you are losing people unnecessarily and leaving money on the table. Hello, I'm Alun Lucas, and this is SEO in 2026 Additional Insights.
Alan, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
My number one tip for 2026 is there is no point in perfecting your SEO if people are getting to your site and seeing a horrible form that causes them to drop out. Make sure you're spending time understanding your form, identifying issues that are causing abandonment.
So what are the typical differences between a well-converting form and a poorly converting form?
So typical ones are, number one, it's broken. Technically, that's an issue. That happens more than you'd expect. Number two is probably you're asking people questions that they don't want to answer and they feel are irrelevant. So, for example, I'm sure you've been on a form and they've asked you for a phone number and you're like, why are you asking for my phone number? I'm just ordering something online. I do not want to get spammed. And so therefore people get annoyed, get suspicious, drop out. That's number two, as well as some general user experience problems where you just designed a form badly or executed it badly and enough people get annoyed that they leave. So you're just leaving money on the table. You're wasting money.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll try and come to all of those areas in slightly greater depth there. You started off by talking about the form being broken. Now, I have often set up a form using maybe a WordPress plugin and a WordPress website. Is that a common way to do it? And what are the issues that tend to be the case when something is broken?
So when something's broken, either it's something technically you're unaware, or typically it's the submit button is not working. Actually, sometimes it's people perceive it to be broken, even if you wouldn't think it was broken. And typically that's because your error messages are not showing. I'm sure you've been on a form, you get to the bottom, you click submit, doesn't work, and eventually you work out, you scroll 3 pages to the top and it gives you a list of 5 error messages. You're like, what's the problem there? So it's as well as, your designer might not think that's broken, but to the user, it does feel broken. And so, there'll be a non-zero number of people who just think, forget this and leave.
How do you know what a good conversion rate is for forums? Because obviously, depending on the number of fields that you have and the audience that you have, it may differ wildly.
No, absolutely. And on our website, we've got like benchmarks for different form types and different industries. However, as you've correctly alluded to, you've got to be very careful because really the only benchmark you should be looking at is against your own benchmark. You just look at what you did last month and is it better than what you did last month? You can go into a black hole of what's a good conversion rate, but the reality is every form is different. So what you really need to be doing is just judging yourself against how you performed the month before.
It would be good to get your thoughts on what you feel is necessary in terms of fields for different situations. Because obviously, if someone's maybe signing up to an email newsletter, then perhaps you just need maybe a first name and email address, or perhaps even just an email address. If someone's signing up to a product trial, then perhaps you need to capture more information, maybe a work email address, perhaps even a physical address possibly as well. So maybe starting off with the email newsletter, do you think it's always necessary to capture the first name as well as the email and perhaps another field as well?
Well, the general rule of thumb is, and also the legal rule of thumb, if you look at GDPR, is only collect the amount of information that you need and no more. And now people like to have the name because it helps them mail merge, and that's kind of okay. And most people don't object to that. But equally, if your email newsletter, if you just want to keep it simple, I'd advise just ask for the email address, get people to sign up. That's the quickest way to do it. So, generally, as you have a more complex form, you do need to ask for more things, but you just need to be careful about why you're asking for them, because too often we see forms where, the marketing department or the compliance department are asking for all sorts of things. And before you know it, you've got a Frankenstein's monster of a form where you're asking people what their hobbies are, when does their insurance expire? And you're just going to lose customers there. You've just got to always take it back to the customer. What do they expect to have to answer in return for what you're giving them? Because no one likes filling out forms. People don't do it for a hobby. They do it because it's a necessary chore to get where, to what you are offering them.
And in your experience for signing up to receive an email newsletter, is there any noticeable conversion rate reduction when you ask for a first name as well as an email address?
At that level, no, we've not seen it. It's because people kind of expect it. The expectation is it's not unreasonable. To give an example I alluded to earlier on, if you were to then ask for a phone number as well, you would see a massive drop off because people will be like, I don't expect that I give my phone number to sign up for an email newsletter. I'm okay giving my name, but not a phone number, not to you, because there's no explanation. So yeah, it's all about what is relevant for that particular form.
And what about for a SaaS website? If someone's signing up maybe for a software trial, is it expected and reasonable to ask for a phone number and many other fields in that situation?
Nowadays, not really. You will get people dropping out because of it. Because again, anything digital, we see, apart from the password field, the phone number field is the most common reason that people drop off because they just hate giving it out. And so if you're asking for it, even in a B2B context, people just don't want to do it. They want to give you the minimum level. And usually that's just email address. You might need to set up a password in certain cases, or you can sign up with Google. It's just about minimizing the friction, because otherwise the more you add into it, the more chance you've got of annoying someone and getting them to drop out.
Okay. I was interested that you started off the previous sentence with apart from the password field. Does this mean that you're maybe, if you're signing someone up to use a platform and you ask them to select a password, you'll have a lower conversion rate than perhaps if you generate a password for them and make them aware of it after they've automatically signed in?
Yes, potentially. The password field always trips people off. It's got about a 10% abandonment rate on average because for various reasons. Often it's not executed very well. I'm sure you've tried to you've been asked to create a password. You put one in, and it's only then it tells you, oh, well, you need a special character, capital letter, minimum 10 characters, and you've not told people at the start, or it's hidden behind, it's masks, so you can't see what you're putting in, and you're being asked to confirm it, and eventually people get annoyed and drop out, and people end up forgetting it anyway. So it's just it is one of the bigger points of friction that you will see on any form. Obviously, a lot of forms don't ask for it, but SaaS products, as you say, typically do. And that's why you'll see more and more offering sign up with Facebook, sign up with Google, because it cuts that out. It's just one click and you're done.
And when you talk about form analytics, so what are you referring to within that? Are you talking about just looking at the back end of the form to seeing what's happened? Are you setting up maybe some kind of goals in GA4 or something else?
Yeah, so there's different ways you can do it. You can set up a specialist product like Zuko Analytics, which basically will track the form behavior and give you all the insights and analytics where people are dropping off, give you ideas why they're dropping off. You can try and use Google Analytics. It's not designed for forms specifically, but there are aspects you can do. But essentially, as long as you've got something that tells you as a starting point where your biggest drop-offs are, that gives you a place where you can start generating hypotheses that people are dropping off on the phone number because they don't want to give it. So for example, let's test if we make the phone number optional. Does that have an impact on completion rates?
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so doing split testing on forums seems like a wonderful idea.
Yeah, no, definitely. We see that all the time. Again, as with any aspects of a website, split testing just allows you to see whether the changes you make are meaningful or not.
I mean, is there any way that you can acquire all the data that you require without having a form at all, or perhaps automatically populate the form with the data somehow?
It depends. But yes, if you'll see, obviously, Google, Amazon, etc. If you're storing your details somewhere else that's trusted, that's a way to cut out the friction for something simple, a simple sign up. Obviously, if you're applying for something like a mortgage, so a lot of financial services companies use analytics because they have to ask a lot of questions. And you can't just take that somewhere if you're asking for someone's income, if you're asking for sensitive information about the family, etc. You need to be able to ask that, and you need to be able to ask it in a way that doesn't unnecessarily put them off.
Great, okay. And I'm just thinking about what you offer within Zuko Analytics as well, and obviously you integrate with many different platforms. Do you have a preferred form provider that you feel out of the box simply gives a slightly better conversion rate?
In terms of the out of the box stuff, HubSpot Forms does quite well, although you don't, as does Jotform. We kind of like those ones. However, what none of the out-of-the-box ones do is really give you control over your error messages and validation. You've got to live within the rules that they give you, which isn't necessarily right. And we see most of our customers actually have built their own forms because they have specific needs. So they might be financial services, so they need to build their validation in a certain way. So typically, if you can build a form yourself within UX design principles that will mean people don't drop out, would go for that. But if you just need a quick lead gen form, potentially something like HubSpot, something like Jotform will enable you to give a relatively frictionless form that's fairly standardized.
Should many websites have hundreds of different forms on their website, or are you generally better off actually having a fairly singular call to action and driving people towards that?
Typically, we find call to action depends on the sector, because if you're, for example, going back to SaaS, you might have a contact us form or a demo form or a sign up form, and that's pretty much as far as you could go. If you're a bank, you might have 20 different forms because you've got 20 different products, which may be similar, but will ask subtly different questions. Generally, it depends on your purpose. If you're looking at a call to action on the website, it's probably you only want to go for one. So again, with SaaS, you probably just want to say, okay, drive people to your sign up form or to your demo form, depending on which is better for you. And then just allow them to find things like contact forms more organically.
What are the typical biggest UX mistakes that you see with form design?
So biggest UX mistakes, number one is probably drop downs. Obviously, in particular on mobile, you might have a drop down which has got 200 options and it's not searchable. And that's obviously one that people, if you watch people do it, they get so frustrated going up and down, etc. You scrolling to the top, scrolling to the bottom. That's a simple one that can be mitigated if you have a search. Just add a searchable drop down, or not to use drop downs at all. We see people try and use drop downs for like 5 options. It's like, you don't need that. You could have radio buttons where you just select which one's most appropriate. And in, say, the mobile environment, that's just one tap and people are done. Another common one is just around error messages, which I touched on before. It's validating them at the right time. You can either be too early or too late with error messages. Sometimes you try and type your email address into a form and it tells you, oh, it's wrong. And you're like, I'm not finished yet. Come on, give me a chance, which is annoying. But equally, you get one where they don't validate it until right at the end, and it gives you a message right at the top and you can't find it out, which I talked about before. The best time to validate an error message is when someone's typed in their answer and moved on to the next field. Then if you immediately tell them, is it right or wrong, they've got the feedback immediately and they can make a change straight away rather than wait. And you kind of notice this, I'm sure, next time you look at a form, you might actually notice if someone does that well, which normally you don't necessarily think about.
I noticed you've got a chat bot on your website. Do you try and get people engaged to begin with through a chat bot and then perhaps ask for someone's details after that? And does that make it more likely to get their details?
Well, the chat bot is primarily to give them a simple way to contact us. So they could email us, but it's another route to us. And obviously, yes, it does warm it up, because the biggest issue with forms is getting those personal details. People don't like giving you them. And so therefore it's just for us anyway, it's a message of answering questions before people have to commit. They don't have to tell us who they are. Ask the questions, hopefully we'll answer them and get them to a place where they're happier to sign up to either a demo or a trial.
Does having good form conversion rates assist with SEO?
Hey, I'm not an SEO expert in that sense, but technically probably not, but it does amplify your SEO, because what we find is consistently when we look at conversion rates, we see that organic traffic in general converts better than paid traffic. So obviously, if you can make that organic traffic even more efficient by improving the completion rate of your forms, making no unavoidable errors which are causing people to drop out, you pull that lever, you're going to get more out of your SEO. But I couldn't necessarily say that it would technically make your SEO better and you get better rankings from having a good form just purely by making a couple of changes.
Alan, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
So my key takeaway is don't chase around the margins for certain activities when you've got a big lever you could be pulling. And that lever essentially is taking a look at your form and seeing if you are losing people unnecessarily and leaving money on the table.
Alun Lucas is Managing Director at Zuko Analytics. Find out more over at zuko.io. Alun, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at seoin2026.com.